So the streets are talking, Victor.
Hey,
Get him, daddy.
don't you walk on me.
Hey Marty, how you doing?
I'm good.
How's the week going?
Oh, not too bad. It's raining every day, though, and it's hot as hell.
Yeah, the humidity is crazy.
So fishing is not good for me because it's between thunder and lightning every day and 95-degree weather. Just haven't been able to go out.
You working on the book?
A little bit, not a lot. This week I've been working on the house,
Gotcha. Yeah.
trying to get some things done. I got 2 chapters to do on the book, so if I can get a couple of free days, I'll make a lot of progress.
Nice. So what's the next trip you're going on?
Well, I may be going to, first of all, to D.C. in November to fish for blue catfish.
Oh, okay.
I was up there recently in my son's house, but the water was too warm, and for some reason, those blue catfish up in D.C. like it when the water gets cold.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they come up to the upper part of the Potomac, where right by D.C. I mean, when we go fishing, we go by the monuments.
Yeah, that's crazy. And you get some big ones right there?
Well, he's caught them up to, I think he caught a 60-pounder.
Wow. What?
Because he
That's a
fished
big
a lot.
cat.
He caught a couple of 50-pounders.
That's a really big cat.
When my wife and I went last year in November, she caught about 3 or 4 records, relatively big, in the 30s and 40s.
Right in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah.
Wow.
Hey, everybody, listen up. We're launching something big for all of our Brooklyn Fishing Club members. It's the BFC Members Only Zoom series, and we're bringing back some of our most legendary guests from the podcast. Crazy Alberto Nee, Paul Dixon, Bouncer Smith, just to name a few. These are live, exclusive Zoom calls where you can ask questions, hear stories that didn't make the show, and connect with these legends in a private, members-only setting. Want in? Go to brooklynfishingclub.com and join the club today. You can also check out the full lineup of upcoming Zooms on our events page. It's free for members, but spots are limited. Don't miss it.
We put in on a ramp that is right by where the Reagan Airport's ramp is, so that when the wind is coming from the north, the airplanes take off right where we're putting the boat in the ramp, in the waters.
Oh, that's some urban fishing right there.
Oh, yeah. We go by the Lincoln Memorial and the whole thing.
Where would you say is the most urban fishing environment you've ever fished? Is that one of them?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
You go by all these big buildings. We go a little further up. We go beyond the whole downtown area there where all those big buildings are. And we go a little further up, and there are trees and stuff. It's like a park.
Oh, okay.
And then there's an area where there's rocks and falls and stuff, and you cannot boat any further north than that.
So where do you find them? On like structure and stuff? Like, are they on like trees and types
Well,
of stuff?
he's become an expert on that. The bottom has holes, very uneven bottom, and whenever you find a big hole, you usually, you go with a little sonar and you mark them.
Yeah.
So what we do in the wintertime is when we mark 4 or 5 big fish, we go a little further up, throw the anchor, and come really close to the hole, and then put 2 or 3 lines. Sometimes he puts up to 4 or 5 lines out.
Wow.
Some people go fishing there and they put like 10 lines out. I don't like that. I
That's
like
too much,
simplicity.
right?
I like simplicity myself, so because, if you hook a fish, then you got to start going crazy, pulling lines out, and the fish starts moving around, then you got problems and tangles and God knows what.
Yeah.
So I like a little more of a simple setup. But yeah, we go and do that, and they the first time that we went, the couple of times that we went in the winter, we did really well. We went this just a few weeks ago, and it wasn't very good at all. Smaller fish and not too many of them.
It's not cold.
But when it
cold
gets
enough,
cold,
right?
we're going to go back. In November, we're going to do that probably for 2 or 3 days. Then we're going to Antarctica, but that's not a fishing trip.
Wow.
That's a trip to with another couple they set the trip up and they invited us. couple of years ago, we set up a trip to Africa, and we invited them to come along, and they did. So they invited us to come along on this trip. So we're going to go there and see the penguins and the whales and all that kind of stuff.
There's no fish to target?
Well, they may be, but we didn't set anything up for that.
Gotcha.
We're going to Tierra del Fuego in Chile. We're flying to the capital city, and then from there we're going south to a town called Punta Arenas, which is almost way at the tip of South America. And then from there we fly to an island, and from there we pick up this boat, and we're going to stay in the boat for a week, and then do excursions every day, 2 or 3 excursions every day from the boat. It's not a huge boat. I think it takes 100 people or something like that. So it's a good, I'm happy to do that. Then in January, we're going to Uruguay to fish for the golden dorados again in El Salto Dam.
And that's all on the fly?
No, that's a combination of fly and spin.
How do you decide what to use when you're down there?
It depends upon the conditions. Every time that we've been there 3 times, and every time the conditions are different. The first time that we went, the water was kind of low and pretty calm. So the hydroelectric pumps were not pumping huge amounts of water. And the fly fishing was good, and fishing with jigs and stuff was also very good. We caught a lot of big fish. My wife caught one that was probably in the 45-pound range. We brought it out of the water, but we didn't really weigh it. We just took pictures and let him go. Because at that time, the first time that we went, women's freshwater records had not been split from men. So men had already established a lot of big fish, so women really didn't have too much of a chance. But now IGFA changed that a few years ago and split the freshwater categories between men and women, which I agree with. It's the way it should be. After all of the women's sports are pretty much segregated. Women compete amongst themselves, whether it's basketball or volleyball or whatever. So she's got a few records over there, and we're going to go back. And now, talking about the conditions, the second time that we went, the water was really, really low. And I took fly rods, but I didn't take a real heavy sinking line. And because the water was very, very low, the fish were really deep in the outflow of this big hydroelectric dam. They got about 16 outlets, 8 or maybe 8. And they have a bunch of different outlets where the water comes out. But the water was so low the second year that we had to really throw heavy jigs right at the outlets to get them. But they bit really well if you did that. So I did not take a real heavy sinking line. So we were kind of out of the game when it came to fly fishing. Now, the third year that we went, the water was really, really high. And we took the sinking line, but it was no good because the water was flowing so strongly that the best situation was to troll with lures with big lips that had rattles and that did a lot of vibration, because I think that the noise and the vibrations attracted the fish to the area, and then they could see the lure because the water was kind of brown. And we also fished with black spinner baits. And again, the spinner baits have these blades that cause a lot of vibration. What I came from that last trip was that vibrations and flashing and noise play a big role when the water is dirty to get the fish attracted to an area, because they hear the vibrations and they get close to inspect, and then they'll see the lure. So this time I'm hoping that we get clean conditions so that we can throw some of these yellow flies that I tied for the alligator gar.
Yeah.
That are about 8 inches long, and they have 2 hooks. And we're hoping to get some, yesterday, the guy that we're fishing with at River Plate Anglers, his name is Patrick Brown, posted on Facebook. Most of the customers that they had fishing yesterday, almost everybody caught at least 150-pound fish.
Wow.
So those are huge. So we're going to go do that.
Gigantic. Oh my God. Is there any bycatch? Is there any other species you could get? Like
big surubim catfish. But those are few and far between. Now, this year, one of the things that I'm going to try to do is use some of the techniques that they use in the Potomac. My son uses in the Potomac to catch the blue catfish. I'm going to try some of those techniques in Uruguay to see if we can get those surubim catfish to more reliably bite.
How big do they get?
They get 60 or 70 pounds.
Wow.
They get pretty big. Maybe the majority are 40, 50, but those are they're pretty big and they're very powerful.
How do you spell that catfish? How do you say that name?
Surubim, I think it's S-U, hold on a second. Let me see if I can find it. Sorubin.
I'm going to look it up real quick.
Surubim catfish. And there are 4 or 5 different species of them. And the IGFA kind of lumps them all together.
Oh, okay. Oh, those are cool.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. And they fight pretty good. And they come up to the surface. They are not really just bottom-dwelling catfish. Sometimes you can see them rolling up on the surface. But most of the bites are deep. So we're going to try to use some of the techniques that they use in the Potomac to catch the blue catfish to see if they work. And again, they rely on putting a weight to the bottom, but then they have a little float that comes up about maybe a couple of feet from the bottom. And then 6 inches above the float is another piece of monofilament, or in the case, what I'm going to use is going to be steel on cable and the bait. But they also put some little propeller things that move around, and they have little metal balls inside of them. They're plastic. So when they move around, they make noise. So between this float that is kind of silverly flashy looking and these little propellers, again, you're making noise and which will attract the fish. So I'm going to try some of those that my son uses in the Potomac to see if they work over there in Uruguay. But because there's so many dorados with teeth, instead of using mono, I will use a steel on, maybe 30-pound or 40-pound steel on.
Can't even imagine a 50-pound dorado. Sounds crazy.
Well, one thing that I wanted to mention to you is that you asked me the other day about who was inducted into the Hall of Fame with me, and I am now more well-versed in who was inducted with me. So if you want to ask me that question, I'd be happy to answer it.
Yeah, so who else was inducted into the Hall of Fame with you that year?
Well, this was in 2018. The induction, by the way, is every year at this time in mid-September, and the induction ceremony for this year just happened over the weekend. But in 2018, when I was inducted, there were a number of prominent anglers inducted. John Barrett, who did the Fly Fishing the World programs for 20 years, and they were highlighted on ESPN on Saturday mornings when they had the fishing shows. And when I was learning how to fly fish, I religiously watched John Barrett do his Fly Fishing the World show. Also, a gentleman by the name of Ralph Christensen Jr., who was a Commodore of the Club Nautico in San Juan, Puerto Rico, which is an iconic fishing club, and was also a big marlin fisherman. Another gentleman that in the 1800s became the father of dry fly fishing, and his name was Frederick Alford. And of course, dry fly fishing, which today we think about fly fishing. Gee, everybody. Well, he invented the idea, let's imitate a floating insect so that the trout will eat it. So Mr. Halford did that, and then the last person that was inducted in that year was a gentleman by the name of Frank Johnson, and he was, among other things, the designer of the mole craft lures, which are so famous. So those 4 gentlemen and myself were the ones that were indicted on 2018.
Frederick Halford was the dry fly king?
Yes, he was the guy that he's called the father of dry fly fishing. So he developed the techniques to which includes making an imitation of an insect that floats and using a line that floats so that it can be presented to the trout and in a manner that is as natural as possible, et cetera, all that stuff. He developed the original techniques. Pardon me?
Was he American?
I don't know that.
Okay. I'll look that up.
I don't know that.
How do they select who gets inducted? Do you have any insight into that process?
Well, I was a trustee for 12 years, but I was never in that committee. But I do have a pretty good idea how they work. Anybody can nominate a person for the Hall of Fame, any angler or member of the IGFA or member of a fishing club or whatever, and they'll get evaluated by the committee and then put on this list. And basically what they do every year is everybody in the committee kinds of selects the top 10 persons that they think ought to be considered. And then the committee meets and all of these names get put together and a list gets developed from that more extensive group. And then after considerable debate and study, then they come up with 5 people. But it's based upon the recommendations of everyone in the committee.
And how many people?
But everybody outside of the committee can nominate somebody.
Oh, okay. So anybody could nominate anybody? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, you can call the IGFA and say, listen, I know this gentleman that is a wonderful angler and made all these accomplishments, and I think he ought to be considered. And obviously, it helps whenever somebody gets nominated, is for whomever is doing the nominating to send supporting documentation
Okay.
and things like that. I have nominated 2 or 3 people, and so far my nominees have not been successful. But I have, on every case, incorporated considerable amount of backup information. But there are hundreds of people in this list that then get circulated to the committee, and then the committee from this list, everybody picks their top choices, and then they get together and finalize that. Boil it down to 5 people. They only 5 people a year get selected.
Do you ever, is there a way to know if you were like on the list before the year you got selected? Like, is there any way to find that out if you were
No,
considered?
that list is kept secret.
Okay. Gotcha.
I had no idea who was on the list.
Yeah.
I didn't try to find out any. I stayed out of that. I had too many other things to worry about, and as a trustee, that was. I was very involved in the records thing and in creating innovations and the world record business and things like that. So I was not too involved in that. One year, the gentleman that is currently the president, Jason Schradweiser, he was the director of conservation and also in charge of the records department at the time. This was about 2009 or so. He called me up and he said, Marty, can you think of a way we want to create a system to do records by length rather than weight? And of course, the benefit of that would be that they will create a set of rules that would say you can measure the fish right on the boat, and one of the requirements is after you do the documenting, the size and all that you must release the fish alive. So I was very excited about that concept because I'm, like I told you before, the more I learned about fishing and about the problems in the ocean, the more I become involved in being interested in conservation and catch and release. If we can enter a record by length and be required to release the fish alive, I thought it was a great thing. So I gave it a lot of thought and came up with an idea of creating a wide cloth that could be rolled up and that had a metal or a wood base to put the fish's nose to it. And I developed it and sent it to them, and they liked it. But initially, they wanted to go with something more simple than that. And they announced that they were going to start the program, but then they backed out and said, we're not going to do that. We're going to wait. And they ended up developing the plan that I had, the methodology that I had developed. And now it's been working for a number of years. And the reason it became successful is because one of the members of the board of trustees, a gentleman from Australia that was a trustee, is the owner of Halco Lures, and he volunteered manufacture the length measuring devices. And now these are made out of a plastic material that rolls up and has a 90-degree angle plastic at one end, and you can put the fish nose to it. And then it's wide, it's about 10 inches wide, so that if you put the fish in it, it becomes a lot easier to take a picture and you can see exactly what's the size of the fish. Because that was a problem with narrow measuring devices. So that's why I created that. So I'm very proud of that because that measuring device has been now in operation for almost 15 years.
Wow. Would you say that's your best invention?
That was one of them anyway.
What were a few of the other ones?
The other thing that I did weren't so much inventions, but methods that we could weigh a fish and still release it alive. Like, for example, I think maybe I talked to you a little bit about that big gar that I recently caught.
Yep.
That we brought it on land and we measured it on a sling with 2 boga grips. We took the pictures and weighed it and took the photographs and measurements and released it alive. So sometimes we would be in a jungle on high water river, and we will go up to we catch a fish and we immediately go to the shoreline, but we couldn't get in the shoreline because the shoreline was inundated. But we find a low hanging tree and hang the boga grip from the tree and weigh the fish that way. So we did all kinds of stuff. Like, I'm very proud to say that the huge 99% of all my freshwater records were released alive. And every saltwater fish that we could release alive, we released alive. Some of them, like king mackerel and barracudas and stuff, we could not release alive. But everything else we did, including the big sharks that I talked to you about before.
Yeah, I saw some of those pictures with you lifting them off the boat. Looked pretty intense.
Yes, that was pretty intense.
And they swam off strong too after the whole thing, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, what we did is we brought this, especially the 200 pounders and bigger. We put them in this live well that Ralph Delph had created on his boat, and we put a bag of ice, a regular 10-pound bag of ice, in the live well with it to cool the fish down, to lower its metabolic rate, so that if it was breathing less amount of oxygen through the water, that it still could make it okay. And that worked pretty well. We were able to release them a lot. We could release everything. The only ones that we could not release were the black tips. The black tips need, they are in constant movement all the time. And we did try to bring one in alive, and he died. So we didn't try to bring any more black tips.
Yeah.
On the well.
That's interesting that's the one species that couldn't handle it.
Right. What I did early on, when we caught some smaller black tips on fly, we were fishing off Cape Sable in Everglades National Park. And what we did is we put a chum line close to the beach in Cape Sable. And we would, when the sharks came in and we threw the fly and hooked them, we would fight them right up to the beach. And then we would jump on the sand, weigh them right there on the sand, and then release them right there in the water. And that worked out pretty well.
So you were putting the chum line off the boat and then hooking them and then fighting them off the beach? Is that what you're doing?
Yes, that's what we do. We do, when we're fishing off the boat, we put in like a ladyfish that we fillet open or something, or a chum bag. And the current, right over in Cape Sable, the water flows really, really hard because the water is coming into Florida Bay, in and out of Florida Bay from the Gulf of Mexico. So there's always a good tide flow there. So we put a chum bag, and within 15 minutes or so, if the black tips are around, they'll come in.
What's the biggest black tip you got?
Well, the one big black tip that I got, I caught it before IGFA had separated black tips from the category of whaler sharks. Because the black tips are a member of the whaler shark category, and IGFA had a whaler shark category that included 3 or 4 species, but they were all lumped together. But one year, they decided to split the black tip out because it was they were very popular fish and people wanted to fish specifically for them. But before that split took place, I caught in Key West a black tip that was about 120 pounds.
Wow.
On fly.
Wow.
And it is still, I think today, it is still the state record.
That's crazy.
I think it was 20-pound tippet, but I
what is that, like a 6-foot shark?
Yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
and pretty heavy because they're when they get like that, they don't get really, really long, but they get pretty stocky.
Right. They've got like shoulders on them. They're big.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The smaller black tips are more slender, but the big ones just get wider.
Did you ever compete in any tournaments?
Yes, not many. I entered the Holly Tarpon tournament with Ralph Delph a couple of times. And I learned a lot with, fishing because most of the time that I went to Key West, I did not fish for tarpon. But when we did the Holly tournament, we spent the whole week fishing for tarpon every day for a whole week. So I learned a lot about fly fishing for tarpon with him. And I came in 4th twice, but I never got better than that. I came in 4th. But we entered the original swordfish tournament, my son Martini and I, with Bouncer Smith, and we won that tournament.
Wow.
With 2 fish. It was 2 nights, and the first night the weather was okay. The second night a cold front came in, and we went out, and it was like 12-foot seas out there. It was pretty rough.
Jeez.
And one of the people that came to help us got sick and started vomiting. And after the guy vomited 4 or 5 times, he said, "Oh my God, I'm feeling tingling in my fingers and my toes and stuff." And I told Bouncer, being a doctor, I knew that he was getting ready to get into big trouble. So I said, "Bouncer, we got to leave." But we still won because it was so rough that very few boats went out, and I don't think anybody caught any fish that night.
What ended up happening to that guy? Was he okay?
Pardon me? Yeah, the guy, we went back. As soon as we cranked the engine up and headed home, he quit vomiting, and we gave him some salt and some water, and he recuperated some of his electrolyte.
Yeah, he bounced back a little.
And he started bouncing back, and by the time we got to shore, he was okay.
So what are some of the other methods you've come up with over your career? I want to hear all about the stuff that you've, come up with on your own and engineered.
Well, I think the length record device was very important. The finding different ways to show people how you can release fish for records and still weigh them, but do everything that you can to release them alive was probably also very important. And because when the records were granted, many times IGFA posted those pictures so that people could see how we did that. So that was very important. I don't know. I'm a fly tyer. I'm very proud to be a fly tyer. I must say that the flies that I tie catch fish, not flies that catch anglers. And what do I mean by that? Some people tie gorgeous looking flies.
Yeah.
My flies are not gorgeous looking, but I have probably 200 world records caught with my own flies or more, because not only my fish, but I have guided other people and tied flies for other people that caught records. So I'm a very successful fly tyer, even though my flies are not gorgeous, but they work.
Have you ever sold them or thought about it?
No. When I retired from being a doctor and a physician, entrepreneur, and whatever, I said I'm not doing any business. So
it's all for the love of the game.
I have donated flies to IGFA for them to sell at their auctions and given flies to friends to use lots of times. Right now, I have in my hand one of these 2-hook yellow flies that I used in Texas to catch that big gar that I just caught. And I'm going to take these flies. I'm going to tie some more. I just ordered some extra hooks. I used to tie a lot of these flies with Japanese hook called Varivas. And now I cannot find them anywhere. So I found a Gamakatsu hook, which is very similar. It's got a wide gap and a small distance between the tip of the hook and the barb. And I think that's very important, because if the distance is very long and the hook doesn't penetrate all the way to the barb, then it's very easy to lose the fish.
Yeah. So you like the Gamakatsu the best?
Well, I just found these Gamakatsu's SC15s, and I'm going to start using them to tie some of these 2-hook flies for the Dorados and for the gar.
Is there anybody that you regularly talk to about tying flies? Anybody that you've learned from in that aspect of it?
When I started fly fishing, I became just obsessed with the idea of finding flies and stuff, but there weren't too many fly shops in Miami. A company, a fishing outfitter called Captain Harry's Fishing Supply that was in downtown Miami, had a whole fly fishing department. And there was a gentleman that ran that department. His name was Bob Kay. And when I found out that this place existed, I would go there once a week. And I was running some clinics in that area. So when I went to visit those clinics to see how they were doing, I went to Captain Harry's in downtown and visited Bob Kay. And he taught me a lot about fly designs and hook sizes and things like that. So Bob Kay was one of my fly tying teachers. Also, Captain Bill Curtis. Initially, he gave me some of the flies that he tied, the superbug, the famous fly that he tied for bonefish. And I started tying those flies. And then whenever I went fishing with a guide, and that guide was using a fly that caught my eye, I would ask them to give me one, and I would bring it home. I still have a box with all kinds of prototypes of flies that I liked. And then I said, okay, I'm going to work with this fly and come up with something that is my own design, but that takes some of those things into consideration. So today, I tie mostly, other than these big flies that I'm tying for the garfish and the big dorados, I tie mostly clouser. I think the clouser is the most effective fly there is.
Across the board for everything?
Pretty much. It behaves more like a jig than any other fly. Streamers are, for tarpon fishing, streamers are the best, because they love to find little fish and shrimp and stuff, right under the surface or on the surface, swimming slowly and stuff. And a little streamer of many different types will work really well. But for most of the other fish, clousers are my favorite flies. They work really, really well. When I go bass fishing or freshwater fishing in the Everglades, or if I go in saltwater fishing for blackfin tunas or bonitos or whatever, I'll use a clouser most of the time. And, if I wanted to go deep, I'll use a bigger dumbbell eyes in front of the clouser. If I want to go shallow, I tie really light eyes on it.
And what is your take on like coloration to the fly? Like,
Well, there are so many different ideas about that. As you ask me this question, the first thing that comes to my mind is when I started fishing with Ralph Delph in Key West. I came one time and then I said, Ralph, okay, we're coming back. I'm coming back in 3 weeks. We have another day and, we're going to fish for, I don't remember, kingfish or whatever it was. Wintertime was a great time to fish in Key West. And so I said, what color fly should I bring? And he said to me, any color as long as it is white. So basically he was telling me, just bring white flies. I did that, but over time, one time I was fishing in Marathon. We found a place in Marathon that had all of these small groupers that we could catch on fly, red groupers and gag groupers. And we were chumming. It was a big grass flat in a huge flat area, but in the middle of this grass flat, there was a limestone hole full of rocks and holes. And it had mangrove snappers, it had some mutton snappers, and it had gag groupers and red groupers. And the first time that we went there, we started throwing live pilchers, to chumming with live pilchers. And the groupers were coming out of the water to eat those live pilchers that we were throwing in. So my guide and for those places in Marathon was a young guy by the name of Chris Morrison. And Chris said, Marty, why don't you tie some of these clouses that you're bringing, but gray and white, so that kind of imitate what a pilcher looks like. And that worked out really well. So I use a lot of gray and white clousers now, because if you're chumming if you're live chumming with pilchers or something like that, if you throw something that matches a hatch, it's the best.
You got
so
to
I
match
tied
the
a lot
hatch.
of them. Yeah. And I also tied a lot of flies with eyes, but with like doll's eyes that float, and that would look like a pilchard or a threadfin herring, and those I would tie about probably 4 or 5 inches long, and you throw those on the surface and you move them slowly, and there's kingfish or anything like that, they'll just come and slam those things really well because they look like a small bait fish swimming on the surface.
And where do you get those eyes from?
Craft shops sell them. They're doll's eyes. Let me see. I'm near my fly tying bench. Let me see. I have a whole bunch of them here in a little bag, but they don't have a label on them. But they're little plastic, and they have a little air sac inside and a little pupil that moves around. So when I tie the fly, I take some glue, either shoe glue or some vinyl glue, and put it on the sides of the head of the fly, and then just pop these on and wait till they dry, and then they're ready.
That's awesome.
So, yeah. So I can tie a fly that looks just like a threadfin herring. In Costa Rica, when we were fishing for mullet snapper and cubera snappers on fly, in the Pacific, those fish will come up from a depth of 40 or 50 feet on a reef all the way to the surface. If you slow troll, they had these, I don't know, they call them Pacific sardines or something like that, but they basically look at like a threadfin herring, but maybe a little bigger, maybe an inch or two in the average bigger than a threadfin herring. And I would then tie a fly that looked like that with feathers, a little bit of gray bucktail on the top and a little white bucktail on the bottom and feathers in the middle and a little flash. And then I would put those doll's eyes. Since we were slow trolling a live bait right on the surface, when the mullet snapper or the cubera came to try to eat that live bait, Bobby McGinnis, which is a great guide in Gofito, Costa Rica, would pull that. And that takes a lot of expertise, because if you don't do it right, the fish will swim up and eat your live bait, and then they'll leave. So you gotta pull that bait out of the water before the fish eats it. And then, as he's taking that fish out of the water and putting the boat in neutral, I throw my fly, and my fly would look almost identical to that fish that we just pulled out of the water.
Wow.
And then, you gotta make a cast that in the general proximity so that that fish can see it. And as soon as they saw it, boom, they would come and slam it. So that worked really well. And Bobby McGinnis was one of the few guys that really knew all of those techniques, just like the guides, the real world-class guides in Key West did. A lot of times I found I go to different places and certain people are just used to guiding to what they know, but they don't know other things. And then you try to do other things, they kind of become resistant, and
Yeah.
it's a problem. So
not very
when I went there
open-minded.
fishing with Bobby, he knew all the stuff. I didn't have to convince him on it. He actually taught me a lot of stuff.
Nice.
And we caught some nice cuberas, and I caught a couple of nice cubera records on fly, and a couple of nice mullet snappers on fly also for records.
So I was looking at some of those pictures you sent me. That one swordfish you got looked like you got it on the fly at night. And I think we talked about it a little
Yes.
the last time we spoke. How,
Yes.
like, what, I feel like fly fishing is difficult enough as it is. What made you want to get into doing it at night? I mean, was the swordfish a one-off, or are there other fish that you've caught at night on the fly?
No, we didn't catch anything else at night, with the fly. What happened was my son was about 8 years old at that time, and he said to me one day, Marty, Dad, I want to go swordfish fishing. So I told him I would talk to Bouncer, and I knew there had been a swordfish fishery in the 70s, but the longliners had wiped it out. But then apparently I did not know that. But when I talked to Bouncer, he told me, yeah, Marty, we can try, because the longliners were not allowed to fish in the Florida Straits now for the last couple of years, and a lot of small fish are coming up. So it's a good time to take your son Martini fishing for a swordfish. So we went, and Martini caught like an 80-pounder on the first trip. And we kind of got hooked on that, and we went with Bouncer a number of times. And I would start bringing the fly rod, but never used it. And then one day said, okay, we're going to do it. And we became more serious about it. And Bouncer and I collaborated on what we were going to do. And I bought a heavy sinking shooting head and a running line, and brand new sinking head and a brand new running line. And I had tied these flies that I had used in Alaska for halibut. That was a 2-hook fly, kind of the size of a billfish fly, but with no popper, with big dumbbell eyes so they would sink, because the fish that I was looking for in Alaska were deep. So we used that, and I put a tiny little Bouncer brought a little cyan light that is called a lunker light, that is only about 1.5 inches long and maybe a quarter of less than like 1/8 of an inch in diameter. And you crack it just like a cyan light, and it glows bright green. So in between the 2 hooks and the fly, we tied a little piece of clear tubing, and then stuck the little cyan light tube into it. And when I threw that fly in the water, it looked just like a squid. So we were fishing, probably 60 feet of water or something like that, when the fish almost yanked the rod out of my hand when he hit it with his bill. And he got the leading hook into the spongy part of the base of his bill.
Got him.
And that hook was never coming out of there.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you too about, do you keep a logbook? Do you follow tides? Are you superstitious about the moon at all? How does all that influence your game?
I don't keep a logbook, in a sense. I have what I do, 2 things. Whenever we caught a record and it was granted and the IGFA sent us the certificate, I put a picture of the fish and the certificate. And that in itself became like a log of where we traveled and what records we caught. I did that not only for me, but for my wife and for Martini and for Danielle. But Danielle stopped fishing when she was 12 because she didn't want to hurt the fish. So she didn't, so I have all her 12 records in a big book, but I have all of mine and all of Martini's and all of my wife's, Roberta. So we can go through that and see exactly where we were, what year, what time of year, everything else.
Right. Gotcha.
So that's kind of, but I don't keep some people keep a log. I probably should have, but I guess I am not that compulsive. So I didn't do it. I also do keep calendars, paper calendars.
Okay.
And I would keep them for 3 or 4 years, because occasionally I would have dates and times and stuff. And I go back and say, okay, 2 years ago, I was fishing with this guy, this place. What time, what was it? What was the moon phase and stuff, things like that. Tide, I do deal with tides. I fish a lot in Everglades National Park. And what I do is totally dependent upon what tide phase where we are at when I get there. On the certain tide phases, I will go to in a certain direction, look for certain fish. In other tide phases, I will go in another direction.
How do you deal with the slack tide?
That is the worst. Luckily, it only lasts about a half hour.
Really? You think that's the worst one?
Yeah, because in Everglades National Park, well, if you're trolling for marlin, it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah.
If you're bottom fishing in 100 feet of water, it probably doesn't make much difference. If you are in Everglades National Park, it makes a world of difference. If you are in a cut in between keys or something like that in the Florida Keys or in the Bahamas, tide flow is extremely important.
Yeah.
In Everglades National Park, which is the closest place to me here that the tides are important and that I fish with a lot, if the water is really, really low, I will go to an area that there's a channel next to a huge flat. And then when the water gets really, really low, all the redfish and all the snook and the tarpon and all the stuff have to leave the flat and get into this channel. And then we throw jigs or sinking flies with, intermediate sinking lines. And we can find redfish and snook and sometimes tarpon and stuff like that in there. Now, when the water is high, we can climb into the flats and pull or use a trolling motor and then sight fish for redfish and snook and stuff like that. So it all depends, on when the incoming tide, you go out to Cape Sable and you want to fly fish for blacktip sharks, that's the time to do it. They love the incoming tide. So yes, tide phase can be very important, but not so much only the tide phase, but moving water.
Moving water, right? And how do you feel about the full moon? I don't catch anything on the full moon when I fish. I'm a new moon guy. I don't know. Do you have a specific moon phase that you like?
To some degree, yes, but it depends. I mean, I used to say, if you're going to go fishing for yellowtails at night or something, this was in my early years when I was into the let's take home fish to eat kind of guy. I wouldn't want to go yellowtail fishing on the full moon. I want to go on the dark of the moon and stuff like that, So yes, and to swordfish is very important especially on fly. You want the swordfish on fly when there is no moon, and the reason for that is because the scattering layer of small fish and krill-like organisms and stuff in the daylight go way deep. But when it gets dark and there's no moonlight, they'll come up to about 20 or 30 feet of water. And then swordfish fishing, the fish will come up to eat the scattering layer. But you got to pick a night when the moon won't come up until late. So you have sunset, and between sunset and moonrise, you have as much time as possible.
Oh, okay.
Because that's when the fly fishing gets best. Because when there's a big moon, there's too much light and the scattering layer won't come up.
Gotcha.
Will stay deeper. And then you're out of the fly fishing range. If you're putting a line 200 feet of water, like people daytime swordfish fish here, because they put a line with a 10-pound weight down 1,000 feet of water. But you cannot do that with fly.
Yeah. No, it definitely takes a lot more finesse, and you got to have everything lined up, seems like.
Yes. Oh, yeah. That is one situation where it is crucial not only to have it's not so much the tide, but you want the moon phase to be such that the sun already went down and it is dark and the moon hasn't risen yet, and then the scattering layer will come up, and then with that comes the predators, and the predator that we're talking about here is a swordfish. I mean, you could get a tuna, you could get a shark.
I mean, I wonder if that theory applies across the board, like even to surf casting for striped bass, because I don't know. I feel like when there's no light in the sky at night, the bite is just always better. Less light, the better.
I haven't done a lot of night fishing for striped bass. The times that I went fishing for striped bass, daytime, moving water was very important.
Yes, absolutely. Turbid water all day. They're just sitting in it, waiting for a meal. I feel like you've eaten a good amount of fish throughout your life. Is there a certain fish that you've eaten that was delicious that the average person might not even think to eat? For example, I've eaten mullet before.
Yes.
It was delicious.
Yes, I agree. And I don't know if you ever eaten smoked mullet roe.
No, I've never tried that.
That is absolutely wonderful.
Oh man.
Yes, I've eaten mullet and I have eaten catfish. By the way, the catfish that are the gaff tail catfish, they're really good to eat.
Really?
I used to have a house in Isla Morada when I was a lot younger, when I was a young doctor. And I would take my oldest daughter when she was a kid, and we would sit in the back. And my house was right by this canal, and we would put 2 or 3 lines out with little spinning rods, and she pulled all the catfish, so that my daughter Allie would fish, and I would fillet him, and we would eat him fresh. I think that the trick, the most important thing having to do with eating fish is that almost any edible fish, if you catch it today and you cook it today and you know how to cook it, it's going to be good.
Yeah.
So I've eaten catfish. I've eaten giant trahiras in Suriname, South America. They are delicious.
What are those?
I've eaten snakehead here that I caught
Yeah,
in
I've eaten snakehead too. It's really good.
And it doesn't have, like, if you eat an Oscar, it's got this strong taste. You eat a snakehead and it's fine white meat. Doesn't
great.
have any. The only problem, and I got to mention this, is because it's very important now, is that I have become very aware of the fact that there is a lot of mercury in the Everglades. And I do not know for sure whether that translates to the same degree to canals where the snakeheads are in Broward County,
Right.
here in South Florida.
Yeah.
So I don't kind of like, I don't want to eat too many snakeheads now, but they're delicious.
I've eaten them down here, and I've eaten the northern snakehead that I caught in Delaware. That was really good as well.
That's I'm trying to remember the scientific name of it. Shana argus. That is the northern snakehead, Shana argus. They're a little smaller in length, but they're a lot stockier.
Oh, they're stocky. We have one area actually in New York City. I'm not going to say the name of the area, but anybody that knows it knows where it is. It's in one of the 5 boroughs, and it's loaded with northern snakehead. One of my buddies got one 37 inches right in the 5 boroughs.
2 years ago, we went on a summer trip. We went to visit our son in the suburbs of Virginia, close to D.C., and we went on an hour and a half trip somewhere. I don't remember exactly where we went, and I was half asleep because we were there early in the morning, and he drove to fish with this guy that was a snakehead guy. And I caught one snakehead that was 8 pounds.
Wow.
But that was the only snakehead that we caught all day. And my son went multiple times this last summer, and he didn't get a single snakehead.
Wow, nothing?
I don't know what happened, that there may be more people targeting them in some areas of the Potomac. But that's where they are. That's what the
I know.
snakeheads are.
I know. There's an area, I think it's at the mouth of the Potomac. It's a swamp.
Yeah.
And
I've actually eaten all 3.
You have?
I was in Malaysia, and I ate the giant snakehead.
How was that? So what was the best one?
I think they're all the same. I don't know that there's
really the one in Malaysia was like purple. That one didn't taste better. I don't know.
Well, the outside is kind of bluish, black, gold, purplish, but the meat is all white. You fillet it, it's all the same. All 3, because the northern snakehead had a little bit of, I guess a little blood in it, but they're all very similar. But as far as taste was concerned, I mean, we ate them all fresh that same day, that we caught them. I think that's the one time, I'll tell you a story, because some people think that some fish are ugly and they don't want to eat them and they don't want to see them. So I'm with this guy that is a friend of mine in Everglades National Park, and I have a trip with him, and I had caught, I'm fly fishing, and we're looking for redfish and snook on the flats. But I caught a couple of mangrove snappers. But my kids were like, I don't know, 6 or 7. My 2 middle ones were 6 or 7 or 8 years old or something like that. So I had 2 mangrove snappers, so I needed to bring more fish to cook. I bring them home, fillet them. I have a house right by the canal, so I can fillet them right in my backyard and bring them in. I don't like to clean fish inside the house. I bring all my fish clean in a plastic bag when I get home. So I caught a jack crevalle. And my guide would not go to the cleaning station that the park had because he didn't want to be seen cleaning a jack. So I said, no problem. I'll bring it home and clean it over here. But I cooked that jack fresh and it was very good. One time I took the guy that for a while was the chief of police here. His name was Ken Harms, a really nice guy. Many years ago, fishing right here in front of Miami for in a wreck for amberjacks. And I caught this fresh amberjack and I took some fillets and I marinated them a little bit and put a little oregano, salt, pepper, and garlic and put them on the grill. And I had some grouper that I had brought out of the freezer and did the grouper as well. And the amberjack was better. Not because I was amberjack, but because it was fresh.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So in my opinion, I eat all kinds of stuff that a lot of people won't eat. I will not eat pufferfish.
Why?
Because you can die eating that damn stuff.
Which one? The one down here?
I had a friend, another guy.
I've eaten them. I've eaten the northern puffer.
Well, I don't know about the puffers that they have these glands, and if you don't clean them well, and those glands break and the toxins affect the meat, you can get paralyzed.
We were out on this boat on one of our club trips, and they were skinning them alive, and the mates, and they were throwing them in the deep fryer, and we all had deep fried pufferfish sandwiches.
I'm not that brave.
That I totally even forgot about that. But they're the little, they're like the green northern puffer that I'm pretty sure they just feed on crustaceans and stuff like that. They don't even have spikes. They don't even have spikes, but they inflate.
I don't think that their toxin that they produce is something like that ciguatera toxin that is produced by eating dinoflagellates. Tiny little fish eat the little microscopic dinoflagellates, and then they accumulate a little toxin, and then the bigger fish eats that one, and then the barracuda eats everybody, and then the barracuda concentrates years and years of toxin, and then you eat it and you get really sick.
Yeah.
The pufferfish thing, I think, is different.
Have you gotten sick from eating fish before?
No. I did get one time something called scumbroid.
What's that?
And that is, there are certain fish, the mackerel family and the jacks, have a lot of histidine amino acid in their muscle tissue. And if for some reason somebody fillets that fish and they don't treat it properly and bacteria get in it, they can convert the histidine to histamine, which is a vasodilator and the medium that causes allergic reactions in people.
Okay.
And one time I went to this restaurant and I ordered a piece of snapper fillet and they gave me a piece of jack. And it wasn't properly prepared. I mean, it wasn't that it wasn't cooked properly. He said it was not refrigerated properly, so it got bacteria in it. And when they cooked it, they killed the bacteria, but the histidine had been converted to histamine. And when I ate that, within 20 minutes, I started feeling flush and I got diarrhea. And I felt terrible, and my blood pressure was low, and I was dizzy.
Jeez.
That's the only time that I got something, and it's called scumbroid poisoning.
And they gave you jack instead of snapper.
Well, listen, regretfully, that's not uncommon at all. There was a professor at Nova University that did a study a number of years ago where they went to a whole bunch of restaurants and went in the menu and ordered them by what the name of the menu, the snapper or grouper or, God knows what. And then they went to the lab and tested it. And they published the fact that a good percentage of those fish were not what they said they were. So, if you're eating snappers and groupers and snook and hogfish all the time, you get a piece of fresh fish, any of those, and you immediately can tell what it is based upon the texture and the flavor and stuff like that. But most people can't do that. And if you put sauce on it or whatever, it becomes more difficult to do that. And if the fish has been refrigerated for 3 or 4 days, then it's even more difficult to differentiate. So you order a piece of snapper and you pay, like if the restaurant was buying the snapper from the wholesaler at the snapper prices, but instead you're getting a piece of jack, which they bought a lot cheaper, but they sell it to you as as a more expensive fish. So they make double. They make on with the normal thing, plus they make on the fact that they bought that fish a lot cheaper and they're selling it to you as something else. That was proven to be the case in multiple situations here in South Florida.
Did you ever sell any of the fish that you caught or donate them or anything?
No, I'll tell you a story about that. No, I didn't think that I should be selling fish. Way before I got involved with IGFA, or even before I entered records, or even before I got involved with the Rod and Reel Club, when I was just going to eat the fish just to bring some home, bring fish to eat at home. Even back then, when I was pretty young and when I was a kid and whatever, I felt that if I caught it, if I killed it, I was going to take it home and I was going to eat it. And I was not going to, I may give it away as a present, but I was not going to sell it. One time, that was just the way I was. One time I entered, you asked me about tournaments. One time I entered a spearfishing contest when I was a young medical resident, still in training at Jackson Memorial Hospital. One weekend I went with my buddy Ruben to a marathon to enter a spearfishing contest. And it was all, free diving. And we went, and that day silt had come in and the water was really silty and you could not see the bottom very well. It was very difficult to. So we went and we didn't find anything. And all of a sudden I found this huge black grouper. Actually, we found 7 or 8 groupers in one coral head that was maybe 30 or 40 feet long by about 30 or 40 feet wide. And it had, was undermined. So it was really had a lot of big holes underneath. And there was this one grouper that weighed about 45 pounds, a black grouper. And I shot that thing and it bent 3 spears before I could bring it out of that rock. And when I brought it out of the rock, I had, it had been a battle, like an hour battle, me trying to get that fish. And when I got it, I went in and they said, well, you can win a prize. He said, but to win a prize, you have to donate the fish. And it was for a good cause. It was not that the cause was they want to donate it for kids to eat in some school or something that the kids had no means and whatever, But I said to myself, I'm going to give up this fish. I'm not going to eat it for a price. I said, I cannot do that. I just cannot do that. So I brought the fish home and I ate it. I did not win my prize. I forfeited the prize and kept my fish. But, that was because I had that strong sense about being a recreational angler even before I knew what that was.
Yeah. When you were in the fishing club, was there anybody you felt like you competed against?
Oh, yes.
Who were some of your best competitors?
Listen, the Rod and Reel Club was such a great place. Who were the people in the Rod and Reel Club? Some of the big names in the Rod and Reel Club. Chico Fernandez, Billy Pate, guides like Ralph Delf, other anglers that were well-known international anglers like Carlos Solis, grandmasters. There were a couple of grandmasters in the club. They were all kinds, and also more contemporaries that were more at my level that I was trying to compete with more. But, I was, because everybody entered fish and stuff like that, you competed with the people that were entering fish. Herb Radner, who was the first guy to achieve 100 world records. He was an very active member of the club, and I competed against him on multiple occasions. So
what was his specialty?
Herb? He was a general, he did a little bit of fly, but he did mostly spin and bait casting. In the Rod and Reel Club, to advance in stature through the batch advancement process, you had to master spin, plug, fly. You had to be able to cast and beat and go through a test to show that you could cast properly, all of these things. Before you could enter any fish in the club, you had to take a test that showed that you knew all the rules. So it was pretty thorough, but it was great because you're competing against all of these. And every week, this was before internet, when I started in 1990, every week the club published a little mail leaflet called the Tackler.
Like a newsletter.
Yes. And in that little newsletter had a report of all of the fish that had been entered the week before by all the members of the club. So you knew who your competition was and what they were doing and where they were going and what was happening all the time. So it was pretty intense.
Who founded that club?
That club was founded in the 1930s.
Wow.
And I know that one of the older members of the club, when I didn't get there until 1990. In the 1930s, I wasn't even born.
Right. Yeah.
A guy named Charlie Richter was a very important member of the club. And he was kind of the keeper of the history and all that. And basically in the 50s, it was a prime of the Metropolitan South Florida Fishing Tournament, and there were multiple fishing clubs in South Florida, and all of these clubs competed not only within each club, internal competitions, but also external competitions among the different clubs. It was a heyday, and there was a lot of fish. So I remember that Charlie Richter would talk about a guy by the name of Luke Gorham, like if he was a god, of the fishing club. And he had passed away by the time I got there, so I never got to meet Luke Gorham. But there were a lot of numbers of very, very recognized anglers. But, by the time I got there, it was Chico Fernandez and Billy Pate and Carlos Solis and Herb Radner were the big guns of the Rod and Reel Club at that time. And then there were a lot of people that competed for, different prizes. They had all kinds of competition. They had spin competition, bait casting competition, general Florida competition, general international, and Florida combined competitions.
Wow.
So it was great. And they had a rule that if you won a major award, which is a yearly, we had to fish the whole year to win it. If you won the one major award 1 year, you could not compete for that specific award for 3 years to give everybody a chance.
Yeah, that's great.
And I think that was very important because that gave the opportunity for a lot of people to develop their skills.
Wasn't there also a shark fishing club, South Florida, that was pretty popular?
I was not a member of any fly fishing club, shark fishing club. They may have been, and I don't know about it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I saw
there were some guys that were shark guides. There was a guy that became kind of notorious lately, Mark the Shark.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say
he did a lot of offshore fishing.
Yeah, he's killed a lot of big sharks.
Right. So that's why I said he became notorious. And there was another guy that was a shark master. He became shark master in the Met. And then he kind of became a guide, and he called himself a shark master guide. And I cannot remember his name now.
I never heard of that one.
But he guided for, he was a general guide, but he specialized in sharks in Key Largo and, Everglades National Park.
Do you think there's still a lot of people that do like exclusively shark guided trips?
I don't know anybody that just does that.
Yeah, it's like something else that they offer down here.
Most guides, well, when I was fishing competitively, and I was fishing with Ralph Delf and Rick Murphy and Chris Dean and a number of other people here in South Florida, all of these guys knew how to fly fish or fish for sharks in general. And if you wanted to do that, Everglades National Park was the best place to do that. Back a number of years ago, also in Key Largo, you could chum for big shark, big lemons and bulls and hammerheads and stuff, especially in the early spring. When the tarpon started moving, a lot of big sharks would come in. And again, you chummed with some barracuda or something in Key Largo and stuff like that. The water was clear, so you could see the sharks really well when they're coming in.
What do you think the most dangerous shark is?
I don't know. I mean, I would think it depends upon the circumstances. If you are swimming in some canal and if you bump into a bull shark, you're probably going to get eaten. So bull sharks are very dangerous.
Oh my God.
Here, I mean, talking about the sharks in South Florida, because, if you bump into a great white, that's a problem.
Yeah.
But here in South Florida, the bull sharks are the ones that have done the most killing of people, I think, because they usually are in brackish water and it's silty and conditions are ideal for them. Tigers are fearless. But yet, and my friend Pat Ford goes diving with those things, and I have videos of this huge
with tigers,
shark that's 400 pounds, bumping into his camera, and he having to push the shark away with his camera. I don't want to do that.
No, thank you.
But Pat Ford is a good friend. He does all that crazy stuff.
That's crazy. I would not.
And he's very good.
What do you think of the shark problem in the Bahamas right now? Isn't it terrible? From everything I've heard, all the guests that I've had, the shark problem, not just in the Bahamas, but even in South Florida,
Well,
is out of control.
I have a theory. I am not a marine scientist, so my theory could possibly be wrong. But my theory concerning South Florida and sharks is that when I came here, and I think I may have mentioned some of this to you on our prior conversation, when I started fishing here in South Florida, this place was teeming with fish in the 60s. And then commercial fishing started to decrease because the amount of fishing here was not as good, and recreational fishing started to increase. As you know, well, now we have millions of recreational anglers in South Florida. Every marina is chock full of boats of every size, and we don't have any areas, or in most cases don't have areas where the fish can grow to normal size and reproduce properly. So as a result of that, all the scientific papers have shown that all of the levels of the fish that are most sought after, the snapper grouper complex, the hogfish, even the grunts, are markedly decreasing in numbers. And they're now at unsustainable levels. So what does that mean to the sharks? In my opinion, what that means is that when there was a big abundance of fish and sharks could go to the reef and eat, as they have for the last 400 million years, by the way, that everything was in balance. But now that we have extracted from the reef line most big groupers and most big snappers, and if you want to find one of those fish, you have to go to a wreck in 200 feet of water and put a live bait and hope that you hook one. But what happens when you hook one? The sharks now know, because the fishing for them, the hunting is so bad on the reef in general terms, that now they have learned. And I'll talk to you about this learning part in a minute.
Hey, everybody, listen up. We're launching something big for all of our Brooklyn Fishing Club members. It's the BFC Members Only Zoom series, and we're bringing back some of our most legendary guests from the podcast. Crazy Alberto Nee, Paul Dixon, Bouncer Smith, just to name a few. These are live, exclusive Zoom calls where you can ask questions, hear stories that didn't make the show, and connect with these legends in a private, members-only setting. Want in? Go to brooklynfishingclub.com and join the club today. You can also check out the full lineup of upcoming Zooms on our events page. It's free for members, but spots are limited. Don't miss it.
They have learned that when they hear the roar of an engine over a wreck, that it means that they may be getting lunch. So they're hanging around that wreck. As soon as you hook a big fish and the fish starts struggling, whether it's an amberjack or a mountain snapper or a grouper, whatever it is, that as soon as their lateral line picks up the vibration, they come in on that fish. If it's daytime, they can see it. And when they get really close, the Rampula of Lorenzini sends the electrical activity, and then they eat it. And the more that happens, the more that learning gets reinforced on the sharks. So I think that we need to start to understand that we need to bring our reef into better balance, that we need to create some areas where the fish can be protected and grow to big size so that they can produce millions of eggs when they spawn, like the groupers and the snappers and stuff like that. Now, that is my theory. Like I said to you, I don't have reams of scientific evidence to back my theory up. But I'll tell you this. I was in Cuba fishing in Gardens of the Queen, Jardines de la Reina. And they also have an area there where they do shark dives. And we were fishing in the afternoon, and we already been fishing all day, and we wanted to take a break. So our guide said, why don't we go to this place and let's catch a barracuda, go to this place, and I'll show you some sharks. We went to this ball that was on the edge of the reef, an anchor buoy ball. The minute that we approached that ball and tied up to it, the sharks started showing up. So why did they do that? Because they already learned. As soon as they heard the engine come up, they knew that food was going to come.
Yep.
And it did. We gave him the pieces of barracuda, and about 10 sharks were there in no time. So basically, they learn. They learn, especially when if food becomes difficult to find in other areas, they are going to learn where they can get their food.
Do you think that's
And
why
that,
shark
and
attacks are
that in
increasing?
South Florida means every wreck
Yeah.
that 200 feet of water or whatever, where there's still some fish that you can find. And in the spring, they're amberjack. But now getting the amberjacks, which we used to be able to get with no problem years ago, now you hook an amberjack south of Fowey Light here in Miami, and he's going to get eaten.
Sucks.
Now, I do not know what role the shark dives and that chump sharks and stuff like that play. They may play a role. I'm not criticizing shark dives, or I think that the bigger problem is that we are decreasing the amount of big fish that live in the reef. As soon as a big fish is big enough to be taken, which is pretty small compared to the big size the groupers get,
Yeah.
it gets taken and it gets kept. So that's a problem. I think that that's the problem. Now, do I have evidence to prove that? I don't. Maybe you need to, what I recommend you do, Victor, is that you talk. There are a number of shark researchers in Rosa Steele School of Marine Sciences and Nova, and you can see if you can do an interview with one of them and do a podcast with them, see what they think.
Do you know any of them?
I knew one called, I don't want to pronounce the name because I'm probably going to mispronounce it, but what I would do is I would call Rosa Steele School of Marine Sciences, University of Miami, Marine Science School. The dean is Dr. Ronnie Avisar, and the guy was called Hammerschlag, Dr. Hammerschlag, but I don't remember whether I'm pronouncing it properly or not. He's done a lot of research on shark. There was a couple of other people from Rosensteel. One of them there is a shark station in Bimini, and I don't know.
Right, I've heard of that one. Yeah.
I don't know who's running that, but they're doing a lot of research on baby lemon sharks.
Have you seen the stuff in South Africa with the great whites getting their livers removed by orca whales?
Yes.
What's your take on that?
I don't know.
Like, what is that? Have you seen the photos of that? It's pretty crazy. Some of the cuts look like they're almost like surgical. Like, how is
Well, remember that the whales are extremely intelligent.
Right.
So we may be having the same problem with the orcas. The orcas eat a lot of fish and marine mammals. One of their favorite is seals, and they're eating the livers of the great whites. They're not even eating the whole shark.
Right. Yeah.
They're doing what the bears do in Alaska when the sockeye salmon come to spawn. They eat the roe and they eat the brains, the bears. After maybe when they're really hungry at the beginning of the run, they'll eat the whole thing. But after a while, you will see all of these dead sockeyes. And I'm wondering if that is a natural behavior of some animals that at some point, that's all they want to eat, the high caloric content food, and that's it.
But it seems like something new that hasn't really been documented before or seemed to have even happened before. I mean, is there something that's changed? Like, what do you...
We are affecting many populations of fish and marine mammals all over the world. And that may be playing a role. I don't know for a fact. I do know that fish learn very fast. When I went to Rosensteel to visit this gentleman that had aquaculture for little cobias and dolphin, and they had the dolphin covered up in this big tank with a big blue tarp, because if they didn't cover him up, they would jump out in the night and fall out of the tank and die. So they had him covered up. But the dolphin knew that as soon as they opened up the tarp a little bit, they were going to get fed. Within a week or two of being in that tank, as soon as you open that thing a little bit to maybe take a picture or look at them or whatever, they would all be right there waiting to eat. So fish learn very, very fast.
What do you think the smartest fish is?
I don't know, but I would say the mangrove snapper is right there on the top of the list.
Why?
Because they sometimes are impossible to get to eat.
Really? I was not expecting you to say that one. It's funny.
They can be very patient. You have to be very patient to catch them sometimes, especially the big ones. But they're, the least concern are the cobias. I mean, the cobias will come right to your boat to see what you are.
Yeah, I've seen that happen. I've had them follow a bunker spoon right to the swim ladder of my buddy's boat, right off New York City. Adrian on Bass Appeal. We had a 50-pound cobia come up behind the boat, right off, mile off the beach. It was crazy. Couldn't get it to commit though, fortunately. But did you see the guys up in Martha's Vineyard that caught the 72-inch tarpon last week?
No.
Yeah, 72-inch tarpon off the beach.
In Martha's 72-inch tarpon.
Yes.
That's a 100-pound fish.
Yes, it was a big fish. It was like a 6-foot fish almost.
That water is warm, but it's still pretty cold.
I've heard rumors though of these tarpon even out on Long Island, and we have one guy in the DEC who was up the Hudson River, and he was checking these like oyster traps because they have this big oyster restoration project up there, and he sent me a picture with his kayak paddle next to a dead tarpon up the Hudson, 6-foot tarpon up the Hudson.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So who knows what's changing? Who knows what's going on?
Well, as the water gets warmer, fish will go further north. I mean, bonefish. When I started bonefish fishing, we said, "Oh, bonefish don't go up too much up the state. They stay here in Florida Keys and Biscayne Bay and whatever." Now they're bonefish up in Jupiter and further north.
I caught a bonefish in Jensen Beach, off the beach.
Right.
It's crazy.
There's a lot of bonefish up there now.
Really? And some good sized ones too?
I don't know about the good size.
Yeah. The one I caught was,
the
it was
reports
pretty
that I've
small.
gotten are small, but once you have small fish, you're going to get big fish too.
I mean, that would be amazing if there ended up being a bonefish fishery over here. One of the next people I'm interviewing are a couple guys from the Bonefish Tarpon Trust.
Well, they do a lot of good work on bonefish, permit, tarpons.
Have you worked with them at all?
I know a lot of the people involved over the years, but I have not worked. I spent most of my time working with IGFA. So for about 12 years,
Have you fished with Tim Choate before?
Tim Choate and I were at the University of Miami at the same time.
Really? That's awesome.
He was a member of the Sigma Chi fraternity, and I was a member of the ATO fraternity, and we were our fraternity houses were like within a half a block of each other.
Wow.
And Tim was very involved. He was chairman of a homecoming, and he was a very actively involved. So he ended up being selected to a leadership honorary society at the university called Iron Arrow. And I ended up a year later or 2 years later, I don't remember exactly, also selected to that. So we were brothers in that leadership honor society, Iron Arrow. And then I started seeing him in fishing shows and stuff like that. But then we lost touch. And I went on to my career in medicine and got real busy. And it wasn't until 1990 that I was able to really get some time and start doing some fishing. I fished all my life, but that's when I joined the Run Reel Club, and I said, okay, I'm gonna take every week. I'm gonna take a day and go fishing because time is passing by, and I can't just be a workaholic. I used to be a workaholic. So Tim and I kind of bumped into each other at different things. Then we both got involved in IGFA, and he became a trustee, and I became a trustee, and he got inducted into the Hall of Fame, and then I got inducted into the Hall of Fame. So our careers have followed a very parallel path, even though it was different. Different things that we did. He had all of these outfitting groups in Galapagos and in Costa Rica and in Guatemala, and I became a doctor and did all these clinics and stuff and worked with Humana and stuff. But yes, I know Tim very, very well.
Wow, it's a small world, isn't it?
And I know you interviewed Tim.
Yeah, I interviewed Tim. I interviewed his daughter, Steph. She's got world records herself. I'm pretty sure she has the female record for black marlin. I think it was, it's almost, there's no way you could forget the pound of it. It was 1,111 pound black marlin.
Oh, that's a huge fish.
Just ones across the board.
Yeah.
I held the bill of it. I went to his house on, I think I interviewed him like right before Christmas Eve last year. And yeah, they have the bill in a trophy. That bill is absolutely ridiculous.
I have a fiberglass copy of a big black marlin bill that was auctioned at the IGFA, and it was signed by a whole bunch of trustees and people who were selected to the Hall of Fame. And I'm wondering, because I saw a bill one time in Tim's office,
Yeah.
and I'm wondering now if this is not a replica of that bill.
I could send you a picture of it. It's 3 feet long at least.
I know, and it's got a base that is almost a foot wide.
Yes. Yeah.
I think I'm looking at it. I'm in my office. I'm looking at it. I think it's maybe the same. If not, it's very similar. Yeah, yeah. Tim did a lot more of that because he had fins and feathers, and he did Costa Rica and Guatemala and the Galapagos. So he focused more on the big fish. I focus more on the ugly fish.
Oh man. Yeah, he definitely caught some big ones. He's quite the character. I asked him to adopt me. He's got some stories, man. And when I interviewed him, Steph dropped off 2 giant binders of pictures from his career. He was in Penthouse magazine. This guy was all over the place. He was, yeah.
I didn't make Penthouse magazine.
He was in He was in
That's
Penthouse,
okay with me.
Australia. He was in Penthouse, Australia. It was like a knockoff.
That's okay with me. He can take that one. But we were never competitors. We've always been friends. I've been a customer of his, I went to Guatemala and Costa Rica most of the time, almost exclusively until he retired and sold the business. I was going to the Fins and Feathers and working with Tim Cho.
How'd you like Fins and Feathers?
Well, I started fishing with him when he was in Costa Rica, and there was no Fins and Feathers. And then he moved to Guatemala. And initially, when he was in Guatemala, he sent his customers to a hotel called Hotel Martita. And then after, I'm guessing 2 or 3 years or 4 years of that, he, I guess, acquired the property and built the Fins and Feathers. I was there a few times in the Fins and Feathers, but I was also in other places that he had before the Fins and Feathers in Guatemala. And I fished with his boats, first in Costa Rica and Capos. That was our first trip in 1992, I think. I went fishing, and that's when I caught my first Pacific sailfish on fly with Captain Brendan Burke on the Magic, which was like the cool boat. It was a really cool boat, the Magic.
Did you get any records down there?
No. I actually at some point tried to get a Pacific sail. I had one on 6-pound tippet for like 2 hours. And on the last jump, when he was already coming in really tired, jumped one more time and just hit the tippet with the bill, and gone it was.
Oh man.
I had epic battles with billfish and epic battles with tarpon, and I lost all those battles. And today I am very happy that I lost those battles because I'm glad I didn't kill any of them.
Wow. How about marlin on the fly?
I was the first guy to apply for the Royal Billfish Slam on Fly, which means all of the billfish. So I've caught the Pacific blue, the Atlantic sail, the white, the black, the stripe, the short bill, spearfish,
What?
and the swordfish.
That's wild. How the hell did you do that? That is...
Over many years. That didn't happen. That didn't happen in 2 months. That happened over 20 years, maybe 30 years. I caught my first billfish on fly in 1992, and I caught the striped marlin in Cabo. That was the last fish I needed in 2017.
Wow.
So it was a long trajectory.
Were there any fish that you lost along the way?
Yes. And I learned the most from the battles that I lost.
Tell me about those a little bit.
Well, I had a blue marlin when in the 1990s, when I was doing that, we did not know what we know today. A lot of technical details that go and equipment that you need to use today that we didn't have then. So I was maybe putting too much pressure. We were not doing the right things, and I was losing a lot of fish. But I did hook this one fish that was probably 300 pounds. It was huge in Venezuela, in La Guaira, with Captain Carlos Hernandez in the GG2. And I fought this fish for 6 hours. And the fish would never jump.
6 hours?
We saw how big it was because he came right behind the boat and he stuck his entire big head out of the water to eat the fly.
Wow.
I fought this fish forever. And at the end of the fight, it broke my tippet. But we learned a lot. I learned a lot about what we were doing. First we didn't have the right equipment. I had a 14 weight rod. That is even too small. And I didn't have the right kind of reel, and I had too much pressure on the drag initially. When the Atlantic or Pacific blues bite, you got to have very little pressure and you got to let them run. Otherwise, they tear you up. I didn't know any of that then. But nevertheless, I fought that fish forever. And at the end, it broke the tippet. And I was heartbroken. I did a video of it. Because, I was with my brother and with a really great fishing buddy that went with me to a lot of places. And they video pieces of it, so I put it together into a video. So that was, we learned a lot. We were backing up on this fish for most of the time, and we were too close to it at too much of a steep angle. We needed to be further back and move the angle around in different ways and kind of have the pressure of the line and the reel against the general direction of the fish, but at the same level, not like at 45-degree angle. It had to be so basically what we needed to do, we did not do. So I learned a lot about that by losing that fish. In Everglades National Park, I had a tag for a tarpon. I wanted to catch a tarpon record. And I came really close 2 or 3 times. So one time we came really, really close. I had a fish that was about 85 or 90 pounds. And that was going to beat Stu App's record if I caught it. On fly with 6-pound tippet.
Wow.
And that was another 2 or 3 hour fight. And at the end of the fight, I was fishing with a really nice guide that I've known since he was in high school by the name of Eric Hursted. Really a fine guide. We made one crucial mistake. We did not have a gaff long enough. Oh, shit is right. I had a gaff that was, I didn't have a gaff. He had a gaff that was about 3 feet long.
Yeah.
And we had the fish beaten. But, with 6-pound tippet and you have almost 100-pound fish.
Yeah.
The fish is going to swim really slow, but you cannot stop a cold with 6 pounds. If you had 20-pound tippet, you could stop a cold.
Right.
Turn it around and do the things that Billy Page showed on his videos. You cannot do that with 6-pound tippet. So we had him there swimming, totally exhausted, really slow. But every time that Eric is tall and thin, every time Eric leaned over with his tiny little gaff to try to gaff him, the fish, all he had to do was move 2 feet away. And we tried, and we tried, and we tried, and we tried. And finally, the tippet broke. And then I went and bought an 8-foot gaff, but it was too late. But I learned how to fight the fish. I learned how much pressure you can put. I learned how to hook them with light tippets. I hooked fish that were in the 60 and 80-pound range with 4-pound tippets, 6-pound tippets. That's as difficult to do.
Yeah.
But it's not just how to hook them, but this is where you got to be a fly tyer. You cannot go to a store and say, "Hey, I want you to give me this 2 tarpon fly so that I can use it with a 6-pound tippet," because they only have tarpon flies for the general population to buy, and they all have big hooks and stuff. I had to tie stuff with tiny little TMCO hooks that were like bonefish size.
So the smaller the hooks, the better.
Oh, well, if you're using 4 or 6-pound tippet, if you use a big hook, it ain't going in.
Yeah, right. You can't set that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the whole business of fly fishing is so complex. People think, oh, once I learn how to cast, no. There's so much to learn about that, which is why a lot of people don't do it, or do it a little bit and get frustrated. So yes, I had that fish on, and we should have had that fish.
Do you think the fly fishing community is a little bit elitist?
Some people are, and that's, in my opinion, is regrettable. In general, I think that because of the nature of fly fishing, it attracts more like retired professionals and things like that. Now there are a lot of young guys and a lot of young women fly fishing.
Yeah, definitely.
But in general, if you go to fishing outside of the general area here, and you go to, let's say, to Argentina to fly fish for the big fish up there, maybe it's because it costs a lot more money. So the only people that can afford to go are people who are semi-retired or already put enough money in the bank to be able to do that. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
So that may be why you see older people being more into that than younger people. There are some people who only want to fly fish and they don't want to do anything else. And I'm not one of them. I cut my teeth at the Rod and Reel Club, and I learned how to do light general tackle, spin fishing, plug casting, and fly fishing. And I can do all of those. I can accurately cast a spinning rod, a fly rod, a bait caster, and I can do general tackle, 2-pound test line up as well as anybody can.
So did you
but a lot of
rise
people won't do that.
Did you rise to the highest rank in that club?
Yes.
What was it, Master Angler?
Well, the Rod and Reel Club had a badge categories, and you started white badge, and then you went to green, which was angler. White was novice, green was angler. Then you got a red badge, which was expert, and to do that, you had to pass all these tests, casting, and you had to enter all these fish in all the different tackle categories with light line and things like that. Then you had to do even more difficult things to become a master. Once you became a master, you got a gold badge. And most people stopped at that. But once you became a master angler at the Rod and Reel Club, then you became a member of something called the Master Anglers League. And the Master Anglers League had 3 levels, had bronze rod, silver rod, and gold rod. And in all the years of the Rod and Reel Club, only 5 people made it to gold rod, which I call, as a common nomenclature, I called the Grand Master Anglers of the club. There were only 5 people. I was very lucky, and I worked very hard, and I was one of them. But I like those kinds of things where you had to work very hard for a long period of time to accomplish that. So I became one of 5 Grand Masters of the Rod and Reel Club.
Wow.
And
who were the other guys?
Carlos Solis was the second one. The first one, gosh, I don't know that I can remember his name, but it was a gentleman that was involved with a family that had the Silver Springs place up in northern Florida. I cannot remember his name. He was the first one. Carlos Solis was the second one. I was the third one. The fourth one was my buddy David Harris, who fished with me a lot. And the fifth one was a Dr. Jerry Matthews. That was only 5. And then in the Med tournament had the All Tackle Hall of Fame. And that one was the same thing. That was very, very difficult. And only 3 people ever did that. A guy named John Lee Still was the first one. Bob Rich was the second one. And I was the third and last. And then the Med tournament started a Fly Fishing Hall of Fame. And I was the only one that did it. Nobody else did it. And I didn't think that was that difficult.
Really?
The All Tackle Hall of Fame was very difficult.
Why was that?
Well, you had to catch a 9-pound bonefish and fly. You had to catch an 18-pound snook on bait casting. And then when the snook laws changed and you could not keep a big fish like that, then they changed to a cobia, and the cobia had to be a minimum of 50 pounds on plug casting gear. You had to catch a permit on spin with 8-pound test line that was a minimum of 20 pounds. You had to catch a 100-pound tarpon on fly with the Met. What did the Met have? I think the Met had 15-pound tippet. You had to catch a big barracuda over 20 pounds on the general tackle 8-pound test line. So all of the fish were very difficult fish to catch. And that's why only 3 people did it. And it took a lot of time and effort. I mean, I had to catch a dolphin. with a spinning gear, dolphin and spin being not just a spinning rod, but artificial, with a leader no longer than the length of the rod. And, all the rules that went. South Florida had all kinds of clubs that had specific rules for bait casting, spin casting, besides fly casting, that IGFA does not have. So it was only the South Florida fishing clubs that had those rules.
You ever get any big triple tail?
Yes. Yes, I got some triple tails.
They get pretty big. My buddy caught the world record, I think.
Well, we used to fish. We used to catch a lot of triple tails in Everglades National Park.
Got like a 30-pound triple tail or something.
That's huge. Most of those fish, I think, are in the Cape Canaveral area that come into that area. Big ones. Most of the triple tails that I caught in Everglades National Park, 10 pounds, 12 pounds. I caught one, but it wasn't for a record. It was about 15 pounds.
You get them on the fly?
Big. No.
All spinning.
Yeah, with a spinning rod.
Yeah. That story about the grouper that you shot 3 times, that was pretty crazy. Any other big fish that you speared?
No, that was one of the biggest fish I speared. I did catch big groupers. I was fishing the Med tournament for Grandmaster Angler, which was also a year long. Well, 6 months, because the tournament lasted from December till May. And you needed to fish big fish on different tackle categories. And Ralph and I went to the Tortugas, and I was jigging on about 250 feet of water with 10-pound monofilament on a spinning rod and a white jig. No bait, because it was spin. The category was spin, which is all artificial. And I hooked this fish. And, well, I caught 2 or 3 that were maybe 10 pounds, 12 pounds. They weren't big enough. We needed a big group. And then I caught this fish that was also like the same size as the other ones that I had already caught. And when I pulled 2 or 3 times on it, and maybe it was 10 or 15 feet off the bottom, the hook came off. And I said, "Oh, Ralph, I just lost it." And no more than a second passed since I said, "Oh, Ralph, I lost it," that the rod bent over again. And now I had a real big grouper. So I started fighting this thing, and there was a lot of current. So Ralph would position the boat, which was an anchor, and then he would have to reposition the boat after a while because the current was moving him. But the current was moving me away from the wreck. So that was good. But the fish started taking line. And at some point, Ralph said, "Marty, you got to stop the fish." So I said, how am I going to stop this fish if I hold this 10-pound monofilament line? So I said, okay, I got to use my muscle memory here to the best of my ability and hold that spool with my hand and just grudgingly let little line out at a time. Finally, the fish stopped and the boat was going away from the wreck, so he could not get back to the wreck. So after about an hour, I start bringing this grouper up. And when the grouper is only like 40 feet or 50 feet from the bottom, a pod of dolphins start swimming under the boat. And I said to myself, if one of them touches the line, it's gone. It's done. 10-pound monofilament. But it didn't happen. And I brought that fish up. And I don't know whether I sent you a picture of that fish or not. That grouper was a gag grouper that weighed about 45 pounds.
Wow.
That was a great catch.
Oh, man. 45 pounds?
That was a huge fish.
Have you ever caught any squid or anything like that? Like, what's the weirdest record you have? Like, what's the weirdest fish you got? What's the ugliest fish?
Well, there is a close battle here. The giant trajeras of South America, I caught them in Suriname. The giant trajeras look like a mudfish. But when you open its mouth, it's got teeth that are 2 inches long, except that they're covered by this membrane, around its mouth, so that you only see the tips of the hooks. But if you were to dry a skeleton of a trajera, you see the actual size. On a 10-pound fish, the teeth are going to be over an inch long. So a mudfish that can weigh up to 30 pounds, those will have huge heads and teeth that are probably 3 inches long. And these things, sometimes when you hook them, jump right out of the water. So this is a pretty ugly fish. I think that they're competing with a giant snakehead from Malaysia for which one is the more ugly fish. So I think that was probably the ugliest fish that I targeted for records.
And where was that?
I caught some nice. That was in Suriname, South America.
Suriname.
Yeah, it's old Dutch Guyana, in between British Guyana and French Guyana, in the middle. And the country is 80% or 85% rainforest. So we
Wow.
would fly from here to Paramaribo, which is the capital city, spend the night in Paramaribo, and then the next morning we would take about an hour and a half flight into the jungle, deep into the jungle where there was nobody. And there, this guy had a eco lodge. His name is Carol Dawson, and Carol Dawson and I became very good friends. And Carol had this eco lodge that attracted people from all over the world, but a lot of people from the Netherlands, from the mother country. And from there, we took a dugout canoe upriver another 30 or 40 miles to a tiny little outpost that he had built called Ancopitz. And we would stay there and we would fish from there all these little tributaries of the Cabalibo River. And up there, there is nobody. And there is no civilization for 100 miles around. And we would spend 3 or 4 days there fishing. And that was absolutely great. And that place is where those giant trajeras were.
I don't even.
And the place also had a lot of red-tailed catfish and surubim catfish, but a lot of giant trajeras.
Do you have any superstitions at all? I don't know if we talked about this last time, but do you have any superstitions?
I don't have superstitions, but my son made me a necklace made out of plastic beads that he made when he was like 7 years old or something like that in camp for 1 year. And he made this thing for me. And that year, I was wearing that necklace when I caught that swordfish and fly. So whenever I go fishing seriously, I wear that necklace. And then I took the base of a horn of a elk, and with a Dremel tool, I made a circle hook pendant. So I have the necklace and a circle hook pendant. Whenever I go fishing, those things are my lucky charms. So that's my superstition, I guess.
So no bananas on the boat, or does it not
Oh,
matter?
I don't care. Listen, I fished with Bouncer for years.
Yeah, I
Bouncer
know.
and
He said he got Fruit of the Loom to take the banana off of the tag.
Very good friends, and he would not allow bananas on the boat. So one time, my wife brings a bag of banana chips, and we're fishing in Biscayne Bay somewhere. And he sees her opening up the bag of banana chips, and he grabs the bag of banana chips and throws it in the water. I thought my wife was going to kill him. And then another time, Bouncer and I are in Bimini by ourselves because we were fishing for the Met Hall of Fame, and we were looking to get a blue marlin, which was one of the fish that we needed to catch on 30-pound test line. And we stayed the morning in Bimini, refuel, and then we were going to go on to Chop Cay. And Bouncer said, "Oh, go ahead and get some banana bread." No, not banana bread, some Bahama bread. So I went to buy Bahama bread, and the guy did not have any regular Bahama bread. He only had banana bread. So I brought 2 beautiful loaves of banana bread that were going to be so good. And I brought him in the boat, and Bouncer saw him, and he said, "What is that?" I said, "Oh, he didn't have regular, but he had banana bread." "Marty, get rid of that thing right now." So I had to get rid of that banana bread.
Yeah, no bananas on the boat.
Yeah, I am not superstitious. I don't know whether he really had that. I think that was more of a public relations.
I don't know. He was
ploy.
pretty serious about it,
Well, he was. I told you, he took my wife's bag of took banana chips and threw them in the water.
He said that one time they had one of the CEOs from Fruit of the Loom out on the boat, and they cut out his tags and they made him change the logo. Pretty much, they made the if you look at Fruit of the Loom, there's no more bananas in the logo with all the fruit. And that's because of Bouncer. That's because of Bouncer.
I heard that story. But I tell you, this Bouncer is a dear friend.
He's a great guy.
I learned a lot from fishing with him. And him and I fished together a lot on my boat. And on his boat too. But when I bought my 35 Cabo, he would come to my house and we would take off on the Cabo. And if my children and family were with me, I became the mate. And that's when I learned the most. I said, Marty, do this, do that, prepare this way, do this, And I was taking the kids fishing. When I was taking the kids fishing, I was the mate and Bouncer was the captain. When I wanted to fish seriously, then I went fishing with him. And then initially he didn't have any mates. And then he got a couple of mates, Ron John, and then he got AB. And in between, he had another guy, a redheaded guy, real nice guy, and a couple of other younger kids that were mates also. But AB was his last mate, and AB is now captain on his own.
Yeah, I fished with AB. He put me on my first sea trout.
He's a very nice guy. Put
me on my first sea trout. We caught snook. We caught a bunch of stuff. Oh, I caught my first hogfish with him.
Yeah, I never caught a hogfish on a hook and line.
Really? That's one area I got you in.
But I shot a lot of them. I shot a lot of them.
Did you? Yeah, I was a total accident that I even caught it. He said we had to let it go. It was out of season, but it was a nice one. It was definitely a keeper.
Yeah. When I was in high school and we go out here, we would go to the patch reefs and not go on the corals, go around at the edge of the patch reef where the sand around the patch reef met the grass, the seagrass. And right at that transition between the sand and the seagrass is where the hogfish were. And we would just go all around the patch reef looking for the hogfish. And as soon as I shot so many big hogfish. But then they start, when everybody started spearfishing and stuff, if you go out there now, you will not find a legal hogfish. The only place that you're going to find a legal hogfish is in Pennycamp because you can't shoot them there.
The one I got was right outside the inlet, right off the jetty.
Yeah. You going with shrimp?
Yeah. Shrimp. Yeah. Shrimps. Yeah. And then I asked AB to get some good pictures, and he got one really bad picture. And I was like, are you serious? You didn't get any other photos? He was like, no, I didn't. I was like, I'll just wait another 35 years to catch another one. Don't worry.
Yeah, well, he's become better at taking pictures now.
No problem, bud. No, he got a lot of pictures, but I was so proud of that one because that was the last thing I expected to catch. And then he put me on the sea trout bite in Biscayne Bay.
Yes.
I don't want to talk too much.
He has some very good spots. I caught some big sea trout with him.
Oh, I got like a really good one with him. Yeah. I would definitely fish with him again. Definitely.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He's a great guy. I'm going fishing with him in October.
And Bouncer is still catching fish. Like he's still,
yes.
He's still doing it.
He's all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah. He's something else, man.
Well, I'm glad that he's taking time to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. He came over to my place when I lived over on that canal in Stewart when I had the tarpon in the backyard. And he was one of the coolest guests I ever had on the show. It's so funny that you guys have fished so much together. It makes a lot of sense.
Well, he was one of my mentors.
How is he like a lot older than you or?
No, we're about the same age. I think maybe I'm a little older than him. I'm 78. I don't think he's 78. I think he's 75 or something.
Did he become a mentor because he was like, I don't know, had he been in the game longer than you?
Oh, yeah. He was already a very accomplished professional captain when I started fishing seriously at the Rod and Reel Club.
Okay, gotcha. Oh, so yeah, he was in the Rod and Reel Club too.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
But he was a guide.
So is that Rod and Reel Club still going on?
No.
Oh, that sucks.
That was the saddest thing that ever happened.
When did it die?
To me, it's the loss of the Rod and Reel Club and the loss of the Metropolitan South Florida Fishing Tournament.
How did they go out?
Well, I mean, if you ask 10 different old members, they'll probably give you 10 different ideas. My thoughts are that at some point in the late 90s, a mega trend really got well established where a lot of young anglers were no longer interested in belonging to a club where people actually met once a week, like the Rod and Reel Club met every Wednesday night, whatever. The trend not only affected the Rod and Reel Club, but a number of fishing clubs in South Florida declined. And some of them disappeared altogether. Now, the Rod and Reel Club had a clubhouse in Palm Hibiscus Island. in an old club called the Club Lido, which, during Prohibition was Al Capone's hangout. And then the club bought this property, and we went to Miami Beach. We took the causeway where all the ships are, all the cruise ships are. You turned left in the middle of the causeway to Palm Hibiscus Island, and you went over a bridge, and the Ron Reel Club was on the right-hand side. The problem was it was an old place that required a lot of maintenance, and it was expensive to have it. So membership in the club was like $1,000 a year, and that's a lot of money for a lot of most everybody. The club started having programs for younger people to join and less expensive for 3 years or something like that. In the hopes that young people, once they become established, they would want to stay, and a lot of people did. But nevertheless, as all the guys retired, whatever, there weren't enough young people to replace them, and the club was more and more expensive to keep. And I think all of these things led to the club not being able to survive. Maybe some changes have been made. I had made some suggestions that were not listened to. I kind of had a feeling that was going to happen. And so I said, why don't we just sell this property, which is in prime real estate,
Yeah.
and buy some little place in Coconut Grove and make it into a clubhouse, put half of the money in the bank. And then then from the interest that the money makes, we can pay an executive director to manage the club properly, which we did. And that was important to have an executive director because he published the tackler and kept all the records and prepared things. But we didn't do that. We stayed there. And finally, the club could no longer stay afloat.
Wow.
And the Med tournament had a similar demise.
You're saying there just wasn't enough interest?
There wasn't. The Met tournament was created in the 1930s, and then it stayed. It was sponsored by the Miami Herald, and it was very popular. It was mostly started to promote tourism, but nevertheless, it stayed on until the year 2000 or whatever. I mean, I don't remember exactly when it finally 2008 when we had that recession. We finally could not get enough. The Met depended on a lot of support from the Marine Industry Association. And when that recession came, a lot of companies, tackle companies and stuff went under. And the ones that survived just could not afford to be sponsoring too many other groups. So that was part of it. Part of it was that people started wanting to join tournaments where you could make money. And I have never been in favor of that. So there were a lot of dolphin tournaments. $10,000 award, for the biggest fish and this and that. And a lot of people wanted to go do that rather. But the Med tournament was a family tournament so that you could enter your family, you could enter your wife, you could enter your children, you could fish yourself. And it had all kinds of categories and things that you could do. So it was great. I love the Med tournament.
Is there anything like that now?
No, not that I know of.
Wow.
Those two things, I was very sad to see them go away. The Ron Reel Club, other clubs as well, and the Med tournament.
Were there any clubs that competed with the Rod and Reel Club?
Yeah, there were a number of clubs that had outings, and they were, competitive outings, and sometimes the outings were held, and some members of the Ron Reel Club had houses in Stiltsville, and they had party there after the fishing. Or people would run their boats over in the bay to the Rod and Reel Club that was right in Palm Hibiscus Island and had a dock behind it. And, boats would gather there. But even if people came on foot, sometimes there would be, inter-club, between different clubs, with competitions and stuff like that. But that kind of started going away. And now some clubs didn't survive, and the ones that survive are barely surviving.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
Now, the Palm Beach Fishing Club apparently still has a lot of members. Well, that's what I hear. Last time I was there, it had a lot of members. But in general, most clubs suffered from, I don't know, people want to do other things or want to do groups in the internet. Or
also, the pandemic didn't help.
Well, all of this stuff that I'm talking about happened before the pandemic.
Yeah, I know. I'm just thinking about my own club. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, the club. Yeah, the pandemic uprooted everybody's life.
I mean, I had a core group of guys that I was, fishing with from the club. We were killing it. And then after the pandemic, everybody got scattered and it was never the same.
Yeah.
So.
Yes.
What are you going to do? You keep it going somehow. Even though I'm down in Florida, we just had a event up in New York last weekend. pure fishing event. So it continues on. I'm surprised that nobody has just held on to that brand name of like the Miami Rod and Reel Club. And they're just, somebody's got to have it. That should be brought back.
I thought that and the mid tournament, are things that should be brought back, but I don't know.
The other one I want to be brought back is when I interviewed Ray Rocher. He talked about they had a tournament in Miami where you had to build your own boat. And I think he caught like 26 sailfish from this little raft that he built.
Oh, I never did that, but I read about it.
So you know what tournament I'm talking about, right? Yeah.
Yeah. That was a number of years ago.
I would love to bring that one back too. We got to talk to the right people. I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's more complicated because, taking a raft out there to fish for sailfish and stuff was not an easy thing to do.
No, definitely not. Especially with all the sharks.
What, you couldn't motor? I mean, I guess you could now go on a paddleboard, one of those things that, one of those kayaks, fishing kayaks.
Yeah, the stand-up paddle boards.
but what Ray was talking about, it was like a raft.
Yeah, it was a little circular raft.
Yeah, but what they did is they put those on a cabin cruiser, okay? And then they hold it out there and just dump it in the water.
Yeah.
And then you fish on that thing. But I don't think that those things were designed that you could motor out there with them. I may be wrong, because I never did it. But what I remember seeing the pictures, those things did not have propulsion.
No, it's just floating.
Right.
Yeah, we should bring that one back. What, if any, records have you taken from the Northeast?
What records have I taken from the Northeast?
Yeah, just because we have a lot of people that live in the Northeast that listen, I'm just wondering if any of the records were in the Northeast.
I'm trying to think. I can't think of any, no, because, most of my fishing has been here, the West Coast of Florida, and internationally.
Gotcha.
I started fishing with my son and stuff up in the Potomac.
Yeah.
And where did I fish? Let's see. We did fish in the Northeast. I did not catch any records. I don't remember whether I did or my son caught blue sharks and striped bass junior records fishing off of Martha's Vineyard in a place called the Claw. Right, way out in the summertime. You go out there and you chum and you get blue sharks and makos. Martini caught, and I have a beautiful picture of Martini pulling out a mako out of the water, about probably 75 or 80 pounds.
Wow.
And he caught a couple of blue shark records and some striped bass records.
What was
fishing out of New Bedford? Not on New Bedford. Out of New Bedford.
Before you mentioned your daughter stopped fishing, she didn't want to hurt the fish. Do you remember what the last fish she caught was, where she decided that?
I think I was seeing some pictures. The last fish she caught for a record, she was like 14 years old or something like that. It was a Dolly Varden in Alaska. It was a junior angler record in Alaska.
Wow.
But you mentioned the Northeast, and I forgot all the fact that we fished with a gentleman that is retired now, but he fished part-time as a guide. He's actually an engineer in a products company that makes all kinds of interesting things, and he's an engineer that helps develop those products. And on the weekends he fishes. His name is Ray Major, and we fished with him a number of years in out of Fairhaven. Fairhaven. He had a fishing club there that he belonged, and he had his boat there. And we would go out. We fished for striped bass quite a bit, but also for bluefish and makos out in the Claw, way out past Martha's Vineyard. Way out there in the middle of nowhere. I don't know exactly how many miles it is, but you don't see land from anywhere.
Ah, that's crazy. Who's Ray Major? What's his deal?
Ray was the gentleman that was a engineer that was part-time. He loved to fish, so we went up to New England for some reason, and somebody recommended a guide, and then the guy said, "Oh, I'm busy, but let me give you the name of this guy, Ray Major." And Ray Major and Martini and I became good friends, and we fished together for quite a bit. And then he retired, and his nephew Billy Major fishes up there a lot, and we were fishing with him this past summer in New England. We fish for black sea bass and striped bass.
Have you been to Europe at all?
Yes, two places. I fished in Italy a little bit, and I caught a record, an all tackle record, big fish that looks like a sardine, and I don't remember the name of it anymore. And we went to
The white sea bass, the labrax?
no,
No.
no, it was like a big sardine. It was like I'm trying to remember, but I can't remember the name. And we fished in Spain in the Ebro. The Ebro? Yeah. The Ebro River for Wells catfish. And we caught a bunch of records there. Wells catfish and light lines. That's when we went, people hadn't, few people had entered real big ones, but
Yeah.
light line fish, nobody had entered. We entered a whole bunch we found a spot that had a whole bunch of small fish. And we entered fish on 4-pound test line and 6-pound test line and 8-pound test line. And we caught some big ones. Wells catfish.
Yeah, they're crazy. I know a fishing club that gets them in Paris, right in the Seine.
I have a friend that fishes a lot in Italy. His name is Paolo Pacchiarini. And he's one of the best fly fishermen in the world and definitely the best fly fisherman in Europe. And Paolo has caught the Wells catfish on fly.
Really?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
He's also fished all over the world and scored black marlin and huge tarpon and big redfish in Louisiana.
What's the overall biggest fish you ever got?
Well, on fly was that shark that it took 385 pounds.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the biggest fish I ever got.
That's wild. 385 pounds.
I was not a big, marlin guy with heavy tackle and stuff like that. I didn't really like to do that.
All about the light tackle quest.
I was more for light tackle and fly, and so I went after all the billfish and fly for that reason.
Any just like smaller fish that you targeted just to get the record?
Once upon a time, IGFA had a number of small fish that were, designated by the angling committee and the board of trustees as record fish, and one of them was an Oscar. The Oscars got introduced here in South Florida. The Oscar initially is called Acará Acu, and it is from Brazil. But here, little Oscars about dollar size, dollar coin size, were sold at aquariums, and people bought them and put them on tanks. But the problem is, as soon as they get a little bigger, they eat everything in the tank. So then people would, instead of killing them, would let them go. So now there are Oscars all over the Everglades. So the Oscar became a record fish, and I found everywhere to find them with Alan Zaremba, really a great freshwater fishing guide that I've known for many, many years and has become very good friends of mine. We found them in the spring bedding. And when they were bedding, you could find big ones. And you just have to, certain places, certain canals, we knew that we could find big ones. I mean, the biggest one that we ever found was 3 pounds. So they're small fish, but they fight really hard. They fight harder than a bass of its own weight by a lot. So they were a record fish. But at one point, IGFA removed a lot of the small fish. So it is no longer a record fish. But once upon a time, an Australian guy said that I was catching aquarium fish for records. So I guess it was an aquarium fish, the Oscar. And there were other small fish that were removed a number of years ago. So they're no longer eligible for records. But I guess the smallest fish that I caught for a record is 1 pound. And it was an all tackle record. It's a fish from Brazil called a pink calcius. I think that in Brazil they call it the arari. And I was like, I don't know how to arari. I mean, it's in Portuguese. I would say A-R-A-R-I. Pink calcius, I think it's called. And I was fishing, at that time I was a record hunter. So I'm in Brazil and I'm fishing for peacock bass, and I throw this fly to the edge of the trees and I'm stripping and I catch this small fish and I look at it and I said, what is this? It's a weird thing. Let's bring it in and weigh it, and because it may be an all tackle. So I caught those. There is also another fish which the scientific name is Cleneciclia marmorata. I'm trying to remember what it's called. And those are also small. They're 1 pound, 2 pounds. But there were 2 or 3 different species of those, and I entered some of those for records as well. all tackle records. They're small fish, but IGFA has a section which is all tackles, and that's the biggest fish ever caught on rod and reel under legal conditions, IGFA rules. If you caught it legally, you can enter it for an all tackle, even though it is not a fish designated for line class records. So I enter some of these small fish for all tackles, like the arari. So those are the smallest fish. So I go from, if I can find it, I'll send it to you. I have the only place where I'll have that picture is in one of my books with all the records, because I used to, when I got the record certificate, I would take the picture that I send in for the record and put it together, and I can try to find it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. You have covered a lot of ground. A lot of ground, man. A lot of stories. I can't wait to read this book.
Well, I'm trying to finish.
You think you're going to self-publish it, or what are you going to do?
I don't know. And my daughter is going to help me write it. I mean, I'm writing it, and when I finish writing it, she's going to review it, and then we're going to decide. There are some areas, like my times in Cuba and stuff. I need to expand on that.
What do you mean?
Well, I wrote like a few paragraphs of that. I didn't write a lot. So I got to, but things that happened when I was 13 years old, I'm 78 years old now. It's not easy to remember all that stuff.
Right.
So I got to try to remember stuff that that makes sense, that would be something significant to write about. So I wrote about the Malecon and fishing and diving and fighting with the big octopus. And
yeah, that was right in my notes when I opened up octopus wrestling. A lot of notes here.
Yeah. I told you that story. Did you have that already? Or no? I don't remember now.
And I can't remember if I wrote it down after we stopped recording. I don't know. What was that?
Well, I was probably 10 or 12 years old or something like that, because I came to the United States when I was 13, so it had to be before that. It was a summer morning in Havana, and all my older friends that I could dive with in the Malecon right at the seashore were busy or something. Nobody could go with me. So I said, well, hell, I'm going by myself. So I went to the Malecon, jumped over the big seawall, and got into the rocks and put on my fins, snorkel, and mask, and a little bag, and went octopus hunting. And I caught 2 octopuses that were maybe 2 or 3 pounds apiece. They were nice size. And then I found this big one. The head was like at least, I don't know, 8 or 10 inches in diameter. It was a big head. And what I would do to be able to grab him and not have him slip away, I would stick my index and middle finger into the head, where the side of the head, where the head meets the body, where the tentacles go out. There's a slit in that head. And if you can stick 2 fingers in there, you can hold them by the head. So I saw this thing and I stuck my hand in where I needed to, and I held him. When I held him, he first tried to grab the rocks even harder. And then I tried to pull him. And then at some point, when I tried to pull him a little bit, he decided to come up my arm. And now this thing was pretty big, and they're pretty strong. So as I had him held by the head, by my 2 fingers inside the side of his head, with a slit where it goes inside his head, he started crawling up my arm with the tentacles and pulling my arm like if I was bending it up on the elbow, because he was coming up my shoulder and my face. And now the tentacles are in my face. And when the tentacles are in my face, I decided that this was not a cool thing. So I pulled my arm sideways and I pushed out and straightened my arm out as hard as I could, because I was really now scared that something was going to happen to me. And when I did that, he pulled out of my face. And I had him by the head and I stuck him in my bag, and I won the fight. But when I got home, my mother says to me, "What happened to you? You have little red marks all over your arm, your shoulder, your face, your neck." So when I pulled them, the suction cups have left little tiny red marks everywhere on my face and my neck and my shoulder and my arms. And they were there for about 3 days or 4 days. But I'll never forget that octopus, because that was the only time that I was really scared, because when he came up, I thought he was going to bite me with his beak, which is supposed to be poisonous and stuff, but he didn't bite me. I didn't give him enough time.
Holy shit.
You're now I'm 78 years old. I look back when I was 10 or 11 years old and I'm fighting that big octopus. I was scared to death, because all of a sudden I'm there by myself. There's nobody there to help me, and this thing is crawling up my face.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So So
Sounds like a nightmare. It sounds
gonna
like
be-
a fucking nightmare.
That's going to be in the story.
That should be the opening scene.
Of course, I cooked him up. He was delicious.
Nice.
I
man.
had a black nanny that weighed. She must have weighed 200 pounds, and she was our cook at the house in Cuba. And when I brought that octopus to a previous smaller octopus that I caught, I remember now. I brought it to the kitchen, and when she saw that octopus, she almost turned white, started yelling at me, and told me to get the hell out of the kitchen and get that damn thing out of there. So when my father came home, I said, Papi, I need to find somebody to teach me how to cook this thing, because Isabel started yelling at me, turned white, started sweating and got tremulous. I thought she was going to die. So we went to, in the corner, in the block, in the corner of the block, there was a little Spanish restaurant.
You almost gave this woman a heart attack.
And I went in there with my father, and there was a brand new cook that had just come from Spain. So I said, listen, I have this octopus and I need to learn how. So he taught me how to cook the octopus. So yeah, I love cooking since I was a little kid. So my father taught me.
Did she end up eating any of the octopus?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
She was petrified. Oh man.
But my mother worked full time, and my father, when she was a teacher, and my father worked full time. So Isabel, the nanny, she was a cook and stuff. But during the day, when I was home, she was like my nanny. So she took care of me.
Yeah.
But by now, I was old enough to be hanging around outside and going by myself. So she was no longer, I was no longer a baby that she needed to take care of, but she was still my nanny.
So you showed up with this giant dead octopus.
So I turned octopus, she turned white, she started yelling at me. Get this thing out of here. I mean, she was really upset. I don't know why. I mean, she was scared to death of this.
Oh my God, that's too funny. I could just see it. At least it didn't kill you, There you go.
No, he didn't kill me.
No.
Supposedly, some places, I think maybe in the Northeast or somewhere, there are bigger ones. I don't know where they are, but in Cuba, this was the biggest one I ever saw. It was about 5 pounds.
You ever catch one of the Humboldt squid?
I've never even seen one.
There's guys from the club that have caught them in the Sea of Cortez.
But they're pretty aggressive. Those are pretty aggressive.
Yeah, they've caught some big ones.
Here,
I'm talking like 60, 70 pound squid.
Here, somebody's caught those big ones. I mean, 6 or 7 pounders. Swordfish fishing.
Oh, but only 6 or 7 pounds. I'm talking, these guys are holding them up. They're almost the size of their bodies.
Oh, no. There's some of those Humboldt squid that are really big.
Yeah.
And they bite.
Yeah, they'll take a chunk out of you.
Yeah, they're pretty aggressive. So, no, I've never seen those. The only squid that I saw, and they helped me in learning how to strip the line for the swordfish that I caught on fly. When I was a little kid and I was diving in Havana, in the seashore there in the Malecon, I go out and I would find schools of squid, maybe 10 or 15 squid, and they would hang around mid-water, and they would just kind of float in the middle of the water there. And if you got close, they would just squirt and move, funny movements that they make. So when I was stripping the fly for the swordfish, I tried to imitate that, and it worked. I tried to imitate that movement. I would strip the fly and then stop it, strip the fly, so the fly would do those kind of squirty movements that they.
Yeah, pretty effective, huh?
Yeah, and I had a little spear gun. When I first started diving, I had a spear gun, had a trident and the tip of the spear, and I would shoot those little squids. But they were not so little; they were like a pound, and I would bring them home and eat them. Those fresh squid are delicious.
Good eating, huh?
Oh yeah.
You ever powerhead any sharks?
No.
That was a big thing back in the day, wasn't it?
Yeah, I still have a powerhead that I made when I was in high school.
Wow.
In metal shop, I still have it.
You made a powerhead in metal shop?
Yeah.
That's great.
It had a bullet tip, and the back you would put a 32 blank, and the tip had a firing pin at one end and tip at the other, and had a hole to put a cable through. And if you hit it, the shaft would be moving forward. If when the front pin, which is also the piece that went into the animal, hit the animal, and the firing pin would hit the 32, it will go in. But I never used it. I tested it on a 2x4, and it split the 2x4 in half, and it bent that one. So I have one left. I still have it here in my. I don't know why I didn't get rid of that, but I still have it. I still have that power head. I gotta find it, and I'll take a picture of it and send it to you.
Sounds great. I can't wait.
All right, man.
All right, thanks, bro. Have a good night.
Same to you.
Don't you walk on me.